Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. The Stranger with a Smile. The village sat quietly in the lap of green mountains, where the clouds came low enough to kiss the rooftops and time moved slowly, like an old man enjoying his tea. In that peaceful place lived Thomas, a man known for the gentleness in his voice and the warmth in his eyes. He wasn't wealthy, but he was rich in ways many had forgotten. Trust, patience, and a heart that believed the world was still a good place. He ran a small store at the corner of the village road. Children came running for candy, elders sat outside for tea, and travelers often stopped by for shelter or stories. Thomas gave freely, his time, his advice, his belief in people, and then one day, he came. A stranger, tall and well-dressed, with a trimmed beard and a voice smooth like velvet. He introduced himself as Victor, a trader passing through, looking for opportunities, resting for a few days. But something about him shimmered, like polished stone under sunlight. He spoke of cities and success, markets and money, but he didn't brag. No, he charmed. He helped old women carry baskets. He gave toys to children. He laughed easily, never too loud, just enough to draw you in. In a matter of days, Victor was no longer a guest. He was one of them. The villagers liked him. Some admired him. A few envied him. But Thomas? Thomas trusted him. They often sat together under the large fig tree outside the store. Victor shared tales of business, of smart investments, rising profits, and golden chances missed by those too afraid to act. Thomas listened, sipping his tea, wide-eyed like a boy hearing stories of distant lands. One afternoon, Victor leaned closer. His tone changed. "There's an opportunity," he whispered. "It's small, but it's real. I can include you, Thomas, only because you're different, honest, like me." Thomas smiled, unsure. Victor continued, "Just a small investment, I promise. In 2 weeks, I'll double it. Triple, maybe. Trust me." Thomas paused. A flutter of doubt stirred in his chest. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, like wind just before a storm. He spoke that evening to Mr. Reed, the old clockmaker, and to Anna, the school teacher. Both gave vague warnings. "He's charming," Anna said, "but so are most foxes before they bite." But Thomas, with a heart built on believing, didn't listen to whispers. He remembered the smile Victor gave to a crying child, the warmth in his handshake, the way he fixed the village pump without being asked. So the next morning, Thomas went to the bank and withdrew his savings, everything he had put aside over the years. His hands trembled as he handed the envelope to Victor, but his voice remained steady. "I believe in you," he said quietly. Victor took it with both hands, nodding, eyes locked into Thomas's. "You won't regret this." The sun that day seemed softer. The breeze carried a strange quietness, and as Victor walked away, the villagers watched. Some hopeful, some uncertain, and Thomas stood there, smiling, unaware that this chapter of his life had already begun to rewrite everything he believed in. Chapter 2. The Fall. The days grew long and heavy after Victor's promises. At first there were small delays, excuses wrapped in smiles. "Just a little longer," he'd say. "The shipment's on its way," or "profits are being calculated." And because his voice still held that same warmth, most believed him, including Thomas. But slowly, like a fog lifting from a morning field, the truth began to show. Victor stopped coming to the village square. He skipped meetings, sent vague messages through others. His tone changed, no longer friendly, just formal, detached. One morning, Thomas stood outside Victor's rented cottage. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was empty. The curtains torn down, drawers left hanging, footprints in dust, gone. No note, no goodbye, just silence. The shock ran through the village like cold wind. Whispers turned into accusations, and soon all fingers pointed to Thomas. You trusted him. You brought him here. You told us it was safe. Thomas stood still under the weight of their words, each one like a stone, heavy and sharp. He wanted to scream, to explain, to remind them how convincing Victor had been. But what good were words now? The money was gone. The trust shattered. He walked home that night with his shoulders hunched, his heart bruised, but not broken. That same evening, Thomas packed a small bag, a few clothes, an old photograph of his wife, and the only thing left untouched, his belief that he had to make this right. I don't know where you are, Victor, he whispered to the stars, but I'm coming. The next few weeks were hard. Thomas wandered from one town to another, chasing whispers and clues. He slept in train stations, asked questions in marketplaces, followed the trail of stories that sounded too familiar. Men cheated, families ruined, hope stolen. The cities were louder, faster, unforgiving, but Thomas kept walking, always with Victor's face in his mind, smiling, lying. Finally, in a bustling coastal city, Thomas heard a name. Vincent owns a string of shops, dresses sharp, talks smooth, sounds like your man. He followed that thread to a luxurious hotel, and there, stepping out of a black car, dressed in fine linen and sunglasses, was Victor, or rather, Vincent, laughing, thriving, untouched. Thomas stood across the street, fists clenched, heart pounding. The noise of the city faded. All he saw was him, the man who had taken everything. He didn't shout. He didn't run. Instead, Thomas took a deep breath and walked away, straight to the police station. It's time someone stopped him, he said, placing a folder of documents on the officer's desk. And I have a story you need to hear. Justice wouldn't be easy, but this was the beginning, not of revenge, but of reclaiming his peace. Chapter 3. What Trust Costs. The market was bustling that morning. Vendors shouted over one another. Colors danced in the sunlight. Red apples, golden fabrics, glinting brass ornaments. But for Thomas, none of it registered. His eyes were fixed on a single figure at the far end of the market, standing beneath a red awning, negotiating the price of imported spices with a calm, polished tone. It was Victor, the same Victor who had once wept in Thomas's arms, who had called him brother, who had taken everything and vanished without a trace. The man who had worn gratitude like a cloak and betrayal like a second skin. Thomas's heart thundered. For a moment, his feet were frozen to the ground. Then, driven by something deeper than anger, something almost like mourning, he moved. He pushed through the crowd. Victor! The man turned. For a split second, confusion crossed his face. Then, recognition. Then fear. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by the cool smile Thomas remembered all too well. Thomas, Victor said, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. What a surprise. Thomas's voice trembled. You disappeared. You took it all. My savings. My trust. People around them began to turn their heads. The market's noise softened as curious eyes watched the unfolding drama. A few pulled out phones. I needed it, Victor said with a shrug. I used it well. Look at me now. Business, connections. That money helped both of us. I taught you a lesson, didn't I? Not to be naive. Thomas's hands curled into fists, but he didn't strike. Instead, he pulled out a folded document from his pocket. A police report, a warrant, the evidence of Victor's deception carefully gathered over the last year. I came prepared. Before Victor could escape, two plainclothes officers emerged from the crowd. There was a struggle, brief and loud. But in minutes, Victor was in cuffs, shouting protests as cameras clicked and bystanders whispered. The court case that followed lasted months. Victor had hidden the money well. Investments, offshore accounts, aliases. But some of it was traceable. Thomas recovered a fraction. Not enough to rebuild what was lost, but enough to bring a sliver of justice. He returned to the village quietly. There was no parade, no celebration. Some had already heard the story. Others asked cautiously, "Did you get it back?" Thomas would only nod. What he truly carried home wasn't money, it was shame, tempered by truth. He visited the few villagers who had trusted him, who had lent money when he vouched for Victor. He repaid what he could, often from his own pocket, even if it meant living simply for a while. And over time, the whispers changed. No longer was he called foolish. He was seen as someone who had loved too openly, trusted too quickly, but who had faced the consequences with dignity. Years passed. Thomas never tried to rebuild the same dream. Instead, he began to teach, quietly, without fanfare. He taught children how to read contracts, to understand money, to ask questions even when the answers might hurt. He told them stories, not about Victor, but about choices, masks, and the quiet strength of wisdom. One afternoon, a boy asked, "Sir, do you hate him now?" Thomas looked out the window at the sun setting over the fields. "No," he said slowly, "I don't hate him, but I won't ever forget. Trust is like a mirror. Once it's cracked, it reflects differently, and some cracks teach us where not to look again." His story became a local tale, a legend told to new generations, not one of glory or revenge, but of caution, of humanity. A tale that warned, not everyone who smiles is a friend, and even a kind heart must carry eyes that see clearly, because trust is not weakness, but trust, once broken, is the most expensive lesson a heart can buy.